The most powerful man in Westeros was wiped from history, and everyone who watched it thought it was a joke. Near the end of the Game of Thrones finale, Samwell Tarly walks into the small council meeting holding a brand new book. Its title? A Song of Ice and Fire. Archmaester Ebrose had spent years writing the definitive account of everything that happened. The wars, the kings, the battles that tore Westeros apart, and Tyrion Lannister, sitting right there at that table as the newly reinstated Hand of the King, leaned forward with genuine excitement to find out how history had remembered him. Sam's face said it all before his words did. Tyrion was not in the book. Not a single mention. The audience laughed. The scene moved on. Most people treated it as a parting joke. The show's way of saying, even the history books thought Season 8 was forgettable. But here is what nobody stopped to actually think about. This moment was planted in Season 2. It was paid off in the finale. And if you read it correctly, it is not a joke at all. It is Tyrion Lannister doing exactly what Tyrion Lannister has always done, winning a game that nobody else even knew he was playing. To understand why this matters, you have to go back to Season 2 and the Battle of the Blackwater. Stannis Baratheon came at King's Landing with a fleet of ships and an army. His forces massively outnumbered the defenders. Joffrey was the sitting king, but Joffrey was also completely useless, a boy who liked watching people suffer from a safe distance, not someone you want commanding a battle. The man actually running the defense of the city was Tyrion, serving as acting Hand of the King. And what Tyrion did was genuinely brilliant. He did not just stand on the walls and hope. He loaded a single unmanned ship with thousands of jars of wildfire, that devastating green substance that burns so hot it melts stone, and sent it drifting into the middle of Stannis' advancing fleet. Then he had Bronn fire a single flaming arrow into it. The explosion obliterated most of the fleet in one move. In the books, he also had a massive iron chain raised across the mouth of the river behind Stannis' ships, so they could not escape the fire. It was one of the most tactically complete ambushes in the history of Westeros. When the wildfire plan was spent and Stannis landed his surviving army at the Mudgate, pushed through on foot, the Hound, one of the most feared fighters in the Seven Kingdoms, refused to keep fighting. The fire broke him completely. So Tyrion put on his helmet, went outside the walls personally, and led a sortie against Stannis' forces himself. He rallied soldiers who had every reason to run by telling them the raw truth. No glory was coming, no reward was waiting, but this was their city, and those were their families behind those walls, so they were going to go kill the men trying to take it. It worked. They held long enough for Tywin's army to arrive and finish the job. Tyrion saved King's Landing. And then, while he was lying in bed recovering from a slash across the face that nearly killed him, courtesy of a Kingsguard knight trying to assassinate him on Cersei's orders, Tywin swept in, took credit for the victory, and had Tyrion stripped of his position as Hand. That is when Varys visited him, and what Varys said is the most important line in the entire show when it comes to the finale. He told Tyrion, "There are many who know that without you, this city faced certain defeat. The king won't give you any honours, the histories won't mention you, but we will not forget." Varys was not being kind. He was telling Tyrion a truth about power that the show had been building toward for 8 seasons. History belongs to the people on the throne, not the people who kept the throne from burning. Tyrion heard it, he understood it, and somewhere in the back of that extraordinarily calculating mind, he filed it away. Now here is where the show and the books diverge in a way that actually matters for this conversation. In the show, Tyrion is broadly sympathetic all the way through. He is smart, funny, occasionally ruthless, but fundamentally someone the audience roots for. When he kills Shae, finding her in his father's bed after she had testified against him at his murder trial, the show frames it as a painful act of betrayal and rage. When he then goes to confront Tywin with a crossbow and shoots him dead while Tywin is sitting on the privy, it is treated as a moment of dark inevitability. Tywin calls Shae a whore one too many times after Tyrion explicitly warns him not to, and that is what pulls the trigger. In the books, it is considerably darker. Jaime reveals to Tyrion right before helping him escape that his first wife Tisha, a woman Tyrion had genuinely loved as a teenager, was never a prostitute. Tyrion had spent his whole life believing that Jaime paid a girl to pretend to love him as a cruel joke. The truth is that Tisha was exactly what she seemed, a real girl who actually loved him. And Tywin, furious that his son had married a common woman, had her brutally gang-raped by Lannister guards while forcing Tyrion to watch, then had her driven away. Tyrion lived with the lie for years. When he finds out the truth right before escaping, something breaks in him entirely. As George R.R. Martin himself put it, sometimes people just get pushed too far. He kills Shay without apology and shoots his father dead. He is not sorry. He does not want to be. The show softened all of this, deliberately keeping Tyrion's hands as clean as it could manage, making him easier to root for. But the core of what the character is, a man who understands that the world is brutal, that power is the only language Westeros speaks, and that survival requires being willing to do things other people cannot bring themselves to do, that was always there. Fast forward to the finale. By the time we reach Season 8, Tyrion's resume looks like this. He was convicted of murdering King Joffrey. He killed his own father. He served as hand to Daenerys Targaryen, a queen with dragons, and then betrayed her by releasing Jaime and ultimately persuading Jon Snow to assassinate her. He ended up imprisoned and waiting for execution. And yet somehow he walked out of all of it as Hand of the King to the newly elected Bran Stark, alive, powerful, back at the table, and not mentioned once in the official history of the era. Think about what is in that book. The Battle of the Blackwater is definitely in it. It was one of the most decisive military engagements of the entire war. But Tyrion, who planned the entire defence, is absent from the record. The murder of King Joffrey presumably appears in that history. The convicted man is nowhere to be found. Tywin Lannister's death, which fundamentally changed the balance of power in all of Westeros, is almost certainly documented. But the person who killed him, gone. This is not what happens when a writer forgets someone. A writer who forgets someone does not have another character in Season 2 specifically foreshadow that the histories will not mention him. That is a setup. The finale is the payoff. This is where Tyrion's lifelong relationship with books and knowledge becomes the key to reading the ending correctly. Back in Season 1, Jon Snow asks him why he reads so much. Tyrion answers, "A mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone." But he did not just read to be clever at dinner. He read because he understood from watching his father Tywin that information and reputation are the most durable forms of power in existence. Tywin Lannister built an empire on a story. The Lannister name, the wealth, the ruthlessness, the absolute certainty that they always paid their debts, was not just reputation. It was a psychological weapon that kept houses in line without Tywin ever having to march an army to their gates. He said it himself in Season 3 when talking to Joffrey. Any man who must say "I am the king" is no true king. Power that has to announce itself is already losing. Power written into the history of a civilization does not need to announce anything. Tyrion absorbed this completely. He also understood something Tywin never quite grasped, that a history which records your crimes is not power, it is a liability. Every decision you make gets filtered through what the record says you are. Every enemy you ever made can point to the book and say, "This is who he is." Tyrion's record, if written honestly, would include being convicted of regicide, killing his own father, strangling his former lover, and betraying 2 different rulers he served. That is not the profile of someone who can govern effectively in a new administration trying to establish legitimacy. Every lord who resented the new Bran government would have that record as their sharpest tool. But a Hand of the King who does not exist in the history books, that Hand has no record to attack. He operates clean. He cannot be defined by his past because officially his past is... The speech Tyrion gave at the Dragon Pit, the one that got Bran elected, is not just a character moment. It is a mission statement. He said, "What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing more powerful in the world than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it." Everyone heard that as Tyrion making a case for Bran, and he was, but he was also telling you exactly how he sees the world, and exactly what he had been doing his entire life. He was not picking Bran because Bran was the best administrator or the most beloved leader. He was picking Bran because Bran had the most powerful story. A child who fell from a tower and lived, who travelled beyond the wall, who became something that was not quite human anymore. That story creates an authority that no army can manufacture and no treasury can buy. And when Tyrion understood that stories are the most powerful force in Westeros, the logical conclusion of that understanding is that controlling your own story, or better yet, removing it from the record entirely, is the most powerful thing you can do for your own future. He did not stumble into being absent from that book. He ended up absent from that book because absence, for a man with his history, was a better outcome than any flattering account could ever be. Now the honest question, did Tyrion actively arrange this? Did he send a letter to Archmaester Ebrose at the Citadel, politely suggesting that certain chapters go unwritten? The show does not show you that scene. It does not give you explicit confirmation, and it would be dishonest to present it as a definitive fact rather than a reading. But here is what the show does give you. Tyrion became Hand of the King the moment Bran was elected. The Hand of the King controls access to the Crown's resources, ravens, and influence. The Citadel in Old Town, the institution producing this official history, depends on the goodwill of whoever sits in power in King's Landing. Tyrion had weeks in a prison cell before the election thinking. He had already demonstrated in that same scene that he could talk a room full of lords into electing someone none of them had planned to elect. Persuading one maester to quietly omit a controversial figure from a history text is considerably simpler than that. He would not have needed to be crude about it. He would not have needed to threaten anyone. He just had to be the hand, let the institution read the room, and allow the natural instinct of every bureaucracy in history to please the people in power to do its work. The reason most people miss all of this is that Season 8 had enough genuine failures that audiences stopped trusting the show to be intentional about anything. And that is fair. Daenerys' collapse into madness happened so fast it felt like pages were missing. The Long Night was shot so darkly that half the audience genuinely could not see what was happening on screen. The writing showed its seams in ways earlier seasons never did. But here is the difference with the Tyrion detail. It has a 7-season setup. Varys told him in Season 2 that history would not remember him. Tyrion spent the entire run of the show being the man who did the work while kings took the credit, and the finale showed him in the seat of power with his crimes nowhere in the written record. That is a thread that runs the entire length of the show. You cannot accidentally create a 7-year callback. That is a choice. But the structure is real. The logic holds. And it fits Tyrion Lannister completely. This was a man who grew up being told he was the family secret, the embarrassment, the one who would never amount to anything. He survived a trial by combat. He survived being thrown in the sky cells at the Eyrie. He survived being slashed across the face at the Blackwater. He survived being condemned to death twice. He survived betraying a queen with dragons. And he ended the show as Hand of the King, running the administration of Westeros from behind a ruler everyone underestimates. With his darkest chapters quietly removed from the record, he did not just survive the Game of Thrones. He played it better than anyone in the end. He just made sure nobody would ever be able to read the full story of how. That is the scene everyone misread. It was not the show laughing at itself. It was the final answer to a question Varys asked in Season 2. And Tyrion spent the rest of the series quietly making sure the answer landed exactly the way he needed it to. If you have been sleeping on this reread, now is the time. Drop in the comments whether you think this was intentional writing or a happy accident that the story accidentally supported. I am genuinely curious where people land on that, and if you want more of these, the things Game of Thrones was doing that nobody was watching closely enough to catch, subscribe and turn on notifications. There is a lot more to unpack,